Hey y'all, thanks for joining us today. If you'd like to know more about all that happens around here at Lifepoint, then you need to download our new app. It's got everything from message notes, upcoming events, reading plans, and even the Sunday set list. We hope this series blesses you. Check this out.
Well, today we're continuing our series, Make Ready. Somebody say, Make Ready. Make Ready. And we're diving into the Old Testament book of Joshua. We're working through the book. We started out strong. We made it through 2 verses last week. We're gonna cover more ground today, but I want us to take a moment as we get into this. And if you've got your Bibles, go ahead and find the book of Joshua. If you wanna get your smartphones out, open the Lifepoint app, and you can follow along with all the notes. While you're doing that, let me just remind you, small groups begin this week. That's some exciting stuff. Matter of fact, tonight begins our small groups. Our middle school and high school student ministry small groups, they're called house parties, are happening tonight. So if you got middle school or high school student, don't miss out. I was just updated. We've got over 600 adults already signed up for small groups. Turn to your neighbor and say, don't miss out. Don't miss out. If you're not in a group, I'm telling you, it's the best part of Lifepoint Church. Get signed up. You can do that by going into the app. You'll see a groups tab, or you can go online, lifepointnow.com/groups, or you can just show up here on Wednesday night and we will get you connected. We want you to be a part of it. Well, Make Ready is about getting ready for what God has made ready for us. It's about understanding that God has a good plan for our life, but we have to prepare for that. Now, last week as we started, I gave you a little bit of background, and I gave you some backstory on how God had been using the nation of Israel, and God had been using Moses to lead the people. So I drew this map for you. I talked about how the Hebrew people were slaves in Egypt, and Moses led them across the Red Sea, down the Sinai Peninsula, up to a place called Kadesh Barnea, where they spent years and years and years and years and years right here. Then they came up north, past the Dead Sea, across the Jordan, into the land of Canaan, which was the promised land. Now, many of you, you're like, now, you asked me online, you're like, I have got a question. This was bugging some of you, and some of you that you have not been able to sleep all week. You're like, why, I just want to know, why didn't they go this way? Right? Come on, I may not be a smart man, but I know what a shortcut is. That's a great question. Why in the world did they, okay. So I answered this on Facebook, but some of you will not hear a word that I say until you're like, why? First off, they didn't have Google Maps, okay? They didn't get to pull up to, this 30,000 foot or even higher view and look down and realize, oh, there's a shortcut. They didn't have that luxury, albeit people did travel. They had been slaves. They never left Egypt, so this was new territory. So that's one of the reasons. Let me show you another reason, okay? The Bible tells us in Exodus 13, watch this. When Pharaoh let the people go, because that was the whole thing, let my people go, God did not lead them on the road through the Philistine country. That's that direct route. Why? He did not lead them through the Philistine country, though that was shorter, for God said if they face war, they might change their minds and return to Egypt. Keep in mind, these were slave people. They were not warriors. They were not accustomed to war. They didn't know how to fight. They would have freaked out. They would have run back to what was familiar, because isn't that what we do? We tend to run back to what's familiar. And it says, so God led the people around by the desert, the scenic route, the desert road toward the Red Sea. The Israelites went up out of Egypt, ready for battle. So they're ready to fight, but they just don't really know how to fight. And so thus begins their journey. So I want to preach a message to you today that I've titled, Walk It Out. Walk it out. Turn to your neighbor and say, walk it out. Walk it out. Walk it out. So I want to give you several words today, 3 words that I'm going to give you as to how do we walk out the plan of God for our life. If you're taking notes, I want you to write this down. The first word is the word promise. Promise. Write this down. Promise. Promise. All right, you writing that down? Promise. So the first word is the word promise. And when we think about this word promise, I want you to know that when God instructs his people, he leads with a promise. I love that God makes us promises before he asks anything from us. Think about this. God makes a promise to you before he asks for something from you. That's the kind of God that we serve. Now, I want us to go to Joshua chapter 1, verse 3, and let's see if we can spot the promises of God. All right? Joshua 1, verse 3, God begins to make promises. Here's what he says. I will give you every place where you set your foot. Promise number 1. Got it? I'm gonna give you every place. You take a step, it's yours. You take another step, it's yours. What a great promise. So there's promise number 1. Your territory will extend from the desert to Lebanon, from the great river, the Euphrates, all the Hittite country to the Mediterranean Sea in the west. No one will be able to stand against you. Somebody say, that's the second promise. So everywhere you go, that's yours, and no one's gonna be able to stand against you all the days of your life. And then as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. That is the third promise. 3 promises of God. Now, when we think about this, the journey that God has called them to go on, I wanna go back to a map for just a moment and show you what God has promised to his people. So he says, every step you take is yours. And he begins to give them some parameters. Here's what he says. He says that I'm gonna give you all of the land that your feet step on, and then he begins to give us some boundary markers. He tells us all the way from, he says you're gonna be able to take, this is the Nile River here, you'll be able to take all of this land from the desert all the way up to the mountains. This is gonna come up the great Euphrates River, and then the Mediterranean Sea. God says to them, all of this is set apart for you. Now, what's interesting is if you stop and you look at the land that is occupied by Israel today, how much is it? Right here. Can you understand why there's a little bit of strife? Now, here's what I think is interesting. What was the promise God said? He said, I'm gonna give you everywhere you go. Nobody will stand against you. I'll be with you. You ever wondered why in the world, with all the enemies that Israel has, they've come out victorious? It's almost as if there's a supernatural protection and provision over Israel. Just amazing, just amazing. Anyway, that was just, maybe you don't geek out on that. I just thought that was kind of a nifty little thing there. So God makes these 3 promises, okay? These 3 promises. Now, this isn't gonna be in your notes. You can write this down. 3 promises. The first is, I'm gonna give you every place you set your foot. Same promise I made to Moses, I'm making to you. And so just imagine God saying, every step you take, I'm with you. Every step you take, I'm gonna give that to you. If God made you, can you imagine if God made you that promise, how many steps would you take? I mean, you're like, another one, like every step you take, right? I would just be claiming all of it. That's the promise of God. As you step out, I'm gonna step in and I'll give this to you. The second promise is nobody's gonna be able to stand against you. Notice God did not say that nobody will try to stand against you. He just said they won't be able to. Listen, enemies will step up. Oftentimes we face opposition and we're like, where are you, God? And God's like, I'm right here. I'm right here. Listen, do not confuse opposition, all right? Do not look at opposition and think you're headed in the wrong direction. Can I tell you what opposition oftentimes is? Oftentimes opposition is affirmation that you're moving in the right direction. Let me say that again, because some of you are bumping up against some opposition right now. You're like, where's God? This isn't working out. I thought if God was in it, it will just work. No, if God is in it, you better work. All right? You're gonna face enemies. There was enemies all over this territory. They had to show up to battle, and when they showed up, they realized God brought a victory. But oftentimes opposition, it's affirmation you're moving in the right direction. I mean, think about it. Why would Satan oppose you if you weren't taking territory? When you're facing that opposition, what I realized is that's the enemy. He's kind of showing his cards. You're moving in the right direction. Don't worry if you face opposition. I tell you, worry if you don't. You hear me? Don't worry when you face opposition. Get worried if you don't face opposition. If you don't run into the devil every now and again, it might be because you're running in the same direction. It's okay to have a head-on with the enemy. And that's what they're about to discover, is that even though God has gone before us, we're still gonna face some opposition. And then that third promise was, as I was with Moses, so I'm gonna be with you. I'm gonna be with you. I'll never leave you. I'll never forsake you. I mean, let me ask you this question. What would you do if you were absolutely certain that God was with you? How different would your life look if you were absolutely certain that God was with you, how much taller would you walk? How much more confidence, how much swagger would you have? When you just knew, you're like, God's got this. God's got this. He'll never leave me. He'll never forsake me, which means when I feel like I'm all alone, I'm not all alone. How much different does your life look when you are absolutely certain that God is with you? So think about this. The same God that made this promise to Abraham, made this promise to Moses, made this promise to Joshua, guess what? He makes this promise to you as well. Think about this. He makes this promise to you. Let me show you just a couple promises of God. Matthew 1:23. This is talking about the birth of Jesus. We usually read this around Christmas time. We're told that the virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel. What does Emmanuel mean? God, somebody say it, God with us. Wait a second. Jesus is God with us. What a powerful promise. I will be with you. Here's another one. Jesus in Matthew 28, some of his last conversations with his disciples, he says, listen, surely I am with you always to the very end of the age. Now think about this. He was about to ascend to heaven, yet he tells them, I'm with you always. That means as a follower of Jesus, he is with you always. Here's one more. Hebrews 13:15. Never will I leave you. Say it with me. Never will I forsake you. The same God that made this promise to Joshua makes this promise to us. This first word is promise. We need to know the promises of God, and we need to stand on the promises of God. Here's the second word that I want you to write down today. It's the word instruction. Instruction. God leads with a promise. He follows it up with some instructions. Instruction. Here's the instructions. Joshua chapter 1, verse 6. Be strong and courageous, because you will lead these people to inherit the land I swore to their ancestors to give them. Be strong and very courageous. Be careful to obey all the law my servant Moses gave you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, that you may be successful wherever you go. Keep this book of the law always on your lips. Meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. Then you will be prosperous and successful. Have I not commanded you? Say it with me. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. What a great promise. Instructions of God. Saying, I've got instructions. Listen, Joshua, first off, you need to know, I got a space for you. I'm gonna go with you. I'm gonna beat up the people that are in your way. However, I'm asking you to do something. Here's this, he says this. He says, first off, I want you to obey the law that I gave to Moses. All right, so God gave this law to Moses. Oftentimes today, we look at a law like it's trying to limit our freedom. But you need to understand, for them, they saw the law as how to best live out a blessed life by God. So God is instructing them, here's how to experience my blessing, my protection, my provision. So for them, the law wasn't a limiting factor. The law was, how do I experience God's best for my life? And so obeying the law, they're told, don't swerve to the right or to the left. Don't deviate from it. And if you stick to the law of God, you'll be successful wherever you go. Wouldn't you love to just know that no matter what I do, I'm gonna experience success? Well, God tells them, if you'll live according to my instructions, you'll be successful. Then he says, don't just obey the law, keep the law on your lips. He tells them to meditate on it. This word meditate is, the idea is muttering. It's, if you were to go to Israel with me, you would see devout Jews would be reading the law, and when they read it, they look a little bit weird. I'm not trying to poke fun at them, but if you don't understand, it's weird. They'll stand there with their Torah, and they'll read, and that you'll see them kind of, lips will be moving. And they're reading the law, and their bodies are rocking. So you're like, what in the world is going on? And what they're doing is they are worshiping the Lord with their whole body. They believe that their body is kind of mimicking the flicker of a flame. It's the light of God. And so their whole body, but with their mouth, they are muttering. It's almost mumbling out the scripture. It's staying on their lips. That one way to keep God's word in your mind is to speak it with your mouth. One way to keep God's word up here is to let it come out of your mouth. And so sometimes when I'm reading the Bible, I get up first thing in the morning, my alarm goes off at 5, and I go make some coffee, I sit at the table, and I start reading. And here's what I find. If I read it quietly, I start thinking about my day. My mind starts wandering. But when I read it kind of softly, because everybody else is asleep in the house, when I'm muttering it, I stay focused on it. I'm able to pay attention to what I'm reading. And so I obey the law, but I also keep it on my lips. I delight in it. And then the third thing he tells them is to don't be afraid or discouraged. Listen, you're gonna face opposition. Discouragement is part of the journey, but you don't have to give into it. So be encouraged. You saw over and over, 3 times, be strong and courageous, be strong and courageous, be strong and very courageous. It was gonna take courage. It takes courage to walk by faith. Can I tell you that? If you've ever taken a step of faith, people are like, oh, just trust God and it'll all work out. You've stood at the edge of this cliff wondering, God, if you don't show up, I don't know how I'm ever gonna make this happen. I don't know how this will ever come to pass. God, if I trust you in my finances, you don't understand. I've run the numbers, and God's like, I know it's scary. Walking by faith can be scary. And I think it's one of the reasons that God told Joshua over and over and over, be strong and courageous, be strong and courageous, be strong and courageous. Don't be discouraged. Don't lose heart. Don't lose heart. Follow the instructions of God. So God leads with a promise. He follows it up with some instructions, and that leads to the third word. Write this down. It's the word obedience. Obedience. The way I like to look at this is there's God's part, and he's already done that. He made a promise. He gave instructions. Now it's up to us. It's up to us to walk it out. Obedience. Look at what happens when Joshua hears these instructions. Verse 10. So Joshua ordered the officers of the people. I love this. He didn't suggest it. Hey guys, if you think it might be a good idea. He ordered the officers of the people, go through the camp, tell the people, get your provisions ready. 3 days from now, you will cross the Jordan here to go in and take possession of the land the Lord your God is giving you for your own. He says, here's what we're gonna do. God has spoken, let's do it. Notice what he didn't do. He didn't take it to a vote. All right, guys, we heard from the Lord, everybody come around. All in favor of crossing this river. How are we gonna cross the river? I don't know, okay? All in favor of crossing the river and attacking Jericho with all these walls. How are we gonna, I don't know. They didn't take it to a vote. Remember what happened last time they took it to a vote? They didn't have faith. They were full of fear, and they've been on a 40-year detour. I'm sure he's like, we are not voting on this again. I do not have enough time left for 40 more years. But isn't that so easy for us when we get God's instructions or God's will is clear and we're like, I don't know, let's take it to a vote. Hey, do you guys think we should obey God or not? I mean, it's never quite that clear cut. It's like, do I trust God with this or do I do what seems to make sense and what I've always done? And so notice that he doesn't take it to a vote. He didn't delay. Literally the very next verse, it's like, so he went and told the leaders, go ahead and tell everybody to get their stuff ready. We're doing this. He didn't ask questions. He said, this is what God has said. And I think when the people of God are willing to stand up and say, this is what God has said, this is what we're going to do, it may not make sense. Other people may say, what's up with you guys? Why did you do that? Listen, this is what God's word says. And so this is what I'm gonna do. I understand, it may seem old-fashioned. It may not be what everybody else is doing this. Everybody else is shacking up before they get married. Everybody else is sleeping together. Listen, I get that. That's what everybody else is doing. And look at what everybody else is getting. Maybe there's another way. I'm gonna go with God, leave the results up to him, see what happens. Listen, when it comes to obedience, either you have it or you don't. There is no like, well, I kind of obey. That's like as a parent when you tell your kid don't play in the road and they're only playing in half the road. Well, they're not really in the whole road. They're not in the middle of the road. I mean, come on. If I say don't do it, don't do it. If I say do it, do it. There is no partial obedience. Partial obedience is disobedience in disguise. And when it comes to obedience, listen, it's easy to talk yourself out of obedience. You know, God, listen, these people, they're not ready to cross the Jordan. How are we gonna get across? Matter of fact, we'll discover this soon, but the Jordan was at flood stage, overflowing its banks. You know, how are we gonna cross? It's easy to get caught up in how are we gonna do this? How are we gonna take this city when we get over there? You know, where are we gonna go? What are we gonna eat? How are we gonna provide? It's so easy to get caught up in all the how. But all Joshua did is he issued an order. Get ready. 3 days from now, we're gonna cross the Jordan. We will take possession. And there was no question about it. Let's go across and see what happens. No, he said, we're going to do this. God's gonna provide. We will take possession of the land. Here's the big idea. Here's what I want you to take away from this, from today's message. All right, write this in your notes somewhere. Here's what we learned from this. If I will walk it out, God will work it out. Will you write that down? If I will walk it out, God will work it out. Somebody say it with me. If I will walk it out, God will work it out. One more time. If I will walk it out, God will work it out. What does that mean? It means that if I will be obedient and walk out the instructions of God, God will work out all the unknown factors that are happening around me that I can't control. If I will walk it out, if I will take this step, God will give me this land. If I'll take this step, God will give me this land. If I will walk out the instructions of God, if I will be in the word, it stays on my lips, I'm obedient to it, God will take responsibility for my life. He'll go before me. It's what he promised, and his promise is true. His promise still stands. But what happens is instead of walking it out, too many of us get caught up talking it out, and then we talk ourselves out of it. Listen, when God gives you instructions, he's not looking for your opinion, he's looking for your obedience. We gotta walk out the instructions of God. And I'll be the first to admit, it's easy to get caught up talking it out. What do you think I should do? Have you ever done this? I've never done this before. I don't know. Come on, talk to me. It's so easy to talk ourselves out of it because we don't know. I get it. You don't know. Some of you, you're trying to navigate a decision right now, and you have no idea what's on the other side of obedience. You're standing there and you're thinking, you know, I've done this my own way, and I've come to know and expect the results I've been getting. I mean, let's talk relationships for a minute. Maybe your marriage isn't where you want it to be. And you've been doing it the same way over and over and over in the way that you're treating your spouse or the way you're raising your kids. And then somebody invites you to a small group to learn about marriage. And you realize I'm supposed to honor my wife, serve my wife the way that Jesus served the church. I tell you, I'll serve my wife when my wife begins to honor me. If she would honor me, I'll serve her, but I'm not serving her till she begins to honor me. At the same time, a wife is over there going, I'm supposed to submit to my husband? Are you kidding me? Do you know my husband? He's submitting to my husband. When my husband looks a little more like Jesus, then I'll submit to him. But until then, so what happens? What happens? If she'd serve me, I'd honor her. If he would honor me, I'll submit to him. And what happens is we have this conflict. Instead of going, okay, God, you tell me that I should serve my spouse, and if I serve my spouse, that I am somehow honoring you. I don't know how my spouse is gonna change, but I'm trusting that you're gonna bring about a change in them. Yes. But I don't feel like it. I don't care about your feelings. Feelings are a terrible, terrible leader in your life. Terrible leader. Do you know how many times I don't feel like doing the right thing? Do you know what I feel like when I wake up? Going back to bed. If I let my feelings control me, my goodness, there'll be no discipline in my life. I don't feel like going to the gym. I don't feel like going to work some days. Guys, I'm gonna let you know a secret. There's some Sunday mornings, I don't feel like coming to church. I'll tell you, trust me, I got the weather app too. I know the North End is beautiful, and I can watch the live stream from there. We haven't figured out how I can live stream from there, then maybe I can do that. But there's times I don't feel like it. And I'm the pastor. I mean, I love you guys and I love it, but here's what happens. Every time I step into what I'm supposed to do, it's like God meets me there. And if we would just learn to step in to the instructions of God. If we would step out in faith, God steps in with provision and promise. So maybe relationships, maybe that's just one area. Probably the biggest area of trusting God that's just terrifying is finances. My goodness. Is there anywhere else that's so black and white? We look at bank accounts, we look at bills, we look at income, we work hard, we put in way more time than we wish. We spend time away from our families to work a job so that maybe someday we can stop working a job and hopefully still have families to spend time with. And then you're trying to tell me that God should be first? And if I put him first, and that like number one line item is like the tithe, returning 10% of my income to God, are you kidding me? How am I gonna live? I can't even make ends meet now. And you want me to, look, I get it, it's scary. This is why I think it's so important to teach our kids at a small age. Because whether it's trusting God with 10 cents of a dollar or 100 out of 1,000, the percentage is the same. And if we can learn to walk by faith at a young age, that's why I love our Lifepoint kids so much, teaching kids how to walk by faith at a young age. If we can model that, parents, then maybe our kids will grow up and they won't have to wrestle with this. They will just learn to trust God through the journey. But I get it. You put it down on paper and you're like, I just don't, unless God does something miraculous, this won't work. Well, hello. We got a miracle working God. I'm always amazed at the people that will trust God with their eternity, but not their reality. Does that seem strange to anyone? God, I trust you to forgive my sins. I'm gonna spend eternity with you. But right now, I got a finance degree, God. I'm good at this. Okay. That may not be your issue at all. I want to encourage you to say, God, if you instruct it, I'm gonna be obedient and I'm gonna walk by faith and I'm gonna take steps. I'm gonna put you first. These guys, as we're gonna discover in this story, they had no idea how all this was gonna play out. And that's where we get caught up. How will God work? How will God do this? How will God provide? How will God heal my marriage? How will God break off this addiction? How will God work with my employer? How? Here's the thing. So often we let the how keep us from trusting who. Do not let how keep you from trusting who. Who instructed you is faithful. Don't let what you don't know keep you from following who you do know. I'm following the Lord. I'm following his instructions. I'm walking by faith. And as we do, as we're about to discover, God goes before us in an incredible way. Would you bow your heads and pray with me? With your heads bowed, I want to ask you one question. One question. What steps do you need to take to walk out God's instructions in your life? This will be different for everyone. Maybe you're at an impasse. Maybe there's something going on that if you would take a step, God will meet you. Maybe it's instructions of God that you have been ignoring. Maybe it's an instruction of God that you've forgotten and all of a sudden today it brought it back to the forefront of your mind. What is it that God is saying? I want you to take this step, and if you will step out, I will step into your circumstances. What is it that God is saying to you today?